Okay, let's unpack this. Get this. The oceans, right? This massive blue heart of our planet, they quietly give us almost half the oxygen we breathe.
Mhm.
And they're these incredible climate regulators, too, soaking up a huge amount of the greenhouse gases we pump out. It's kind of mind-blowing when you stop and think about it.
It absolutely is. I mean,
Yeah.
the oceans are just fundamental to life, period, a vital part of Earth's whole life support
Yeah.
system.
Yeah.
But the sources you shared, they really hammer home how much we've maybe taken that for granted, pushing them, to a crisis point.
Right.
And that's exactly why this deep dive right now really matters to you, the listener.
Absolutely. So we're jumping into the source material you provided. It was a really insightful webinar. Lots of experts weighing in to explore these two massive kind of tangled threats facing ocean health today. Plastic pollution, which is everywhere, and the ongoing problem of overfishing.
Yeah, two huge ones.
Our mission here is to cut through the noise, pull out the really key knowledge, the surprising bits, and help you get up to speed quickly on these critical issues. Feels timely too, doesn't it?
World Oceans Day is coming up.
It is. And that theme they have, wonder sustaining what sustains us.
Yeah, I like that.
It really captures the challenge, I think. How do we hold on to that sense of awe for this incredible system, but also face the urgent need to, well, sustain it against all the pressure we're putting on it?
Exactly. So let's dive right into what the sources were saying about the scale of this crisis. It's way more than just, water.
Earth is the blue planet. The maritime domain is just dominant.
And like we said, its role, indispensable. 50% of our oxygen absorbing 30% of greenhouse gases,
Yeah.
regulating the climate.
And a really dangerous misperception the webinar flagged is this idea that the oceans are somehow infinite, like an endless resource or a bottomless pit for our garbage.
Right, like you can just keep taking and keep dumping.
Exactly, and the reality just couldn't be more different. The picture the experts painted was pretty stark. They literally said the oceans are in hot waters, sea surface temperatures soaring.
Yeah, which is already hurting biodiversity, marine ecosystems. It's a direct impact.
And then there's just the sheer amount of pollution. It's indiscriminate.
Yeah.
Millions of tons of plastic, other garbage just pouring in, contaminating habitats, devastating biodiversity. There was one stat that really jumped out at me, the prediction that if we keep polluting at current rates, in just a few decades, there could actually be more plastic in the ocean by weight than fish.
More plastic than fish. Let that sink in.
Crazy.
And that leads us right to the two core problems we're focusing on today. First, you've got illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, IUU fishing.
The bad stuff.
Yeah, plus just straightforward overfishing. It's severely depleting fish stocks around the world, and it hits millions of livelihoods hard. It's not a new problem, but it's definitely not gone away.
Still a huge issue.
And second, that plastic pollution we were just talking about, it feels less like pollution now and more like a deluge.
Yeah, a flood.
And the experts in the sources, they were pretty blunt. Efforts so far have mostly just, quote, skimmed the surface.
Not enough, basically.
Not nearly enough decisive impact.
And the call to action was loud and clear. Strengthening global resolve, charting some kind of global maritime accord, a really comprehensive action plan. The message was basically, we need to act, seriously act, now.
Yeah, these are global problems. They need that kind of big, united response. No question.
Okay, so let's dive deeper into that first one, the plastic deluge. A really sobering fact from the sources. Something like 80% of all the pollution in the ocean actually comes from land.
80%, yeah. It's not mostly stuff dumped from ships. It's flowing in from rivers, from coastal areas.
And the numbers, when you look at them, are just, wow. Globally, we produce over 400 million tons of plastic waste every single year.
400 million.
And that number is projected to triple by 2040.
Triple. It's unbelievable.
And of that, about 11 million tons end up in the oceans annually.
Okay, try to picture this. 11 million tons a year. It's like dumping a full garbage truckload of plastic into the ocean every single minute.
Every minute, wow.
Of every day.
And there's already, what, an estimated 200 million tons floating around in the oceans right now?
Roughly, yeah. That's the estimate.
Yeah.
Which is how you get to that terrifying prediction we mentioned.
Yeah.
By 2050, the actual weight of all that plastic could outweigh the total weight of all the fish in the sea.
Just hard to even imagine.
And here's the really grim part. Plastic doesn't just vanish. It sticks around. It accumulates.
Right, doesn't biodegrade like, say, an apple core.
Exactly. The sources highlighted it takes maybe 500 to 1,000 years for plastic to decompose in the environment, if it even fully does. One point that really hit home was that basically 100% of all the plastic ever made still exists somewhere in some form.
Like a planetary landfill that just never gets emptied, we just keep piling more on.
Precisely. And this stuff travels. It floats, gets caught in ocean currents.
Creating those giant garbage patches, the gyres.
Yep. That Pacific one, Charles Moore found back in '97. That was a real wake-up call. He sailed for, what, over 1,000 miles through what he called a plastic soup.
Just endless floating plastic.
And it's not just, bottles and bags. The sources mentioned finding everything fishing nets, obviously, lots of packaging. But also big stuff. Traffic cones, dolls, even old TVs.
Wow. But maybe even more worrying is what happens to it over time, right?
Absolutely. It doesn't biodegrade, but it does break down. Wave action, salt water, sunlight. They physically break it into smaller and smaller fragments.
Microplastics.
Microplastics, and eventually even smaller, nanoplastics. But crucially, they still have their polymer structure. They're just tiny bits of plastic.
It's still plastic.
Still plastic, and this creates a massive headache for researchers. The sources describe these microplastics as complex mosaics. They're not all the same. Different types of plastic, different chemical additives mixed in, and they change as they degrade.
So trying to figure out exactly how much is out there is really tough.
Incredibly difficult, yeah. The technical challenges are huge, especially for the tiniest particles.
There was this thought experiment in the webinar that kind of puts the potential scale in perspective. It said, okay, imagine that 200 million tons of plastic already in the ocean breaks down completely into, say, 50 nanometer particles.
Tiny.
Right. Really tiny. Theoretically, you'd end up with something like 286 million of those particles in every single liter of ocean water.
Every liter. Wow. Okay, obviously not all of it is broken down that small yet.
Right, not yet. But it's heading that way. It's fragmenting all the time.
And critically, these microplastics aren't just on the surface. That's a key point. Surface estimates are already mind-boggling. The sources mentioned 358 trillion particles.
Trillion.
But there's more and more evidence showing countless more trillions accumulating deeper down, in the water column and especially in seabed sediments.
So it sinks.
A lot of it does, yeah. Denser plastics sink naturally, and even lighter plastics can get colonized by marine life, get weighed down and sink. The material highlighted that about half of urban plastic waste is actually denser than seawater anyway.
And they found it even in the deepest parts of the ocean, like the Mariana Trench.
Detected right at the bottom, yeah. Which strongly suggests the deep sea floor is becoming the main long-term dump site for plastic debris. It's gradually getting covered.
That's terrifying.
And what's frustrating is that standard sampling methods, the nets they use, often miss a huge chunk of these tiny particles. Maybe up to 90% of the really small stuff just goes right through.
So the numbers we have, as bad as they are, might be underestimates.
Very likely, especially for the smaller fractions. And this is truly global. Those garbage patches, they're not just sitting there. They're like factories constantly churning out microplastics.
Which then gets spread everywhere by currents.
Exactly. Even super remote places, like the Arctic. Studies found high concentrations there. Ice cores showed levels maybe 100 times higher than in the Pacific Gyre.
Wow. In the Arctic.
Yeah, it gets everywhere.
The sources also mention another surprising place they build up, the thermocline.
Right, that layer in the ocean where the temperature changes sharply with depth. The change in water density there can actually trap lighter microplastic particles. They just get stuck, suspended.
So it's like layers of plastic contamination throughout the water.
You could almost picture it that way, yeah. Accumulating at these boundaries. And even marine organisms themselves can move plastics around vertically and horizontally. It's just pervasive.
It just makes the need for action so incredibly clear, doesn't it? The ocean is choking. And if we don't do something decisive, now the consequences could be irreversible.
Totally. So, okay, how do we start tackling this monster? The experts laid out some key action areas. One really fundamental step, Admiral D emphasized this, is we have to shut the tap on land.
Stop it at the source.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Stop those millions of tons flowing from rivers and coasts into the ocean in the first place.
Which ties into that global plastic pollution treaty they're working on, right? Under the UN.
Precisely. The goal there is a legally binding agreement that addresses the entire plastic life cycle. Production, use, disposal. Explicitly preventing it from getting into the marine environment.
Makes sense. But what about all the plastic that's already out there?
That's the other side of the coin.
Yeah.
Clean up. Launching a massive global effort to remove the accumulated plastic, especially those huge floating islands, the gyres.
Just scoop it up.
Well, yeah, but the idea is also to leverage technology, figure out how to recycle what's collected, and ideally bring it back into the circular economy. Don't just move it from the ocean to a landfill.
Okay. And focusing on rivers seems key, given what you said about where most of it comes from.
Absolutely critical. The sources highlighted that almost 90% of river-based plastic pollution comes from just 10 rivers globally. They act like plastic superhighways.
10 rivers carry 90%. Wow. They mentioned the Ganga and Brahmaputra in India.
As examples, yeah. Which brings us to a really inspiring part, the role of youth leadership.
Oh, yeah, the IMUN India project. Swatch Sagar.
Exactly. Clean and healthy oceans. It's a collaboration with the Indian Navy, a nationwide youth-led movement. It's about awareness, sure, but also civic responsibility and direct action.
So they're actually cleaning up.
Cleaning water bodies, collecting waste, and crucially, getting it recycled. It shows that, as they put it, rivers can carry hope, not just plastic.
That's fantastic. But it does bring up a question that came up in the discussion. How do you make sure that kind of energy and awareness goes beyond youth groups? How do you get the general public on board?
Yeah, that's a good point. And the response was interesting. It was basically that leadership isn't just about titles. It's about action. Every single person taking responsibility. Every small act matters. The oceans need that widespread sense of responsibility, not just sympathy from afar.
Everyone has a role to play.
So, alongside these big picture things, what about the practical ground level stuff? The sources distilled some known solutions, things that maybe aren't flashy but are really vital.
Like what?
Well, policy, for one. Banning single-use plastics. India did that in 2022. And really implementing and enforcing extended producer responsibility, EPR.
Making companies responsible for their packaging waste.
Exactly. About 40 countries apparently have EPR laws, but the sources suggest implementation is often patchy, needs teeth.
And supporting innovation too, right? Like better materials.
Yeah, sustainable alternatives. Genuinely biodegradable packaging, better plastic-to-fuel tech, waste-to-energy systems. We need innovation across the board.
And corporations need to step up.
Definitely. Disclosing how much plastic they use, setting real reduction targets, and being held accountable for actually collecting and recycling it.
And community action, like those cleanups.
Absolutely fundamental.
Yeah.
Cleanup drives schools, neighborhoods, public spaces. And setting up proper segregated waste collection points. That Swatch Sagar project found that separating waste properly makes a huge difference in whether it actually gets recycled.
Right, contaminated plastic is harder to recycle.
Much harder. And underpinning all this, leadership. Electing leaders who actually prioritize climate and environment, who put it in their platforms.
So it's got to be a movement. Everyone involved.
That was the core message, yeah. Students, NGOs, communities, corporations, government, all pushing in the same direction, with strong policies covering the whole plastic life cycle. Not just cleanup, but prevention too. Mandatory policies.
Okay, so from an engineering angle, how do we deal with the plastic we do have, especially the stuff that's hard to avoid? The sources talked about recycling approaches, mechanical recycling first.
Yeah, that's the most common one. The physical process.
Yeah.
Sort it, clean it, shred it, melt it down, make new stuff.
The standard recycling bin stuff.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And it's good, reduces waste, saves energy compared to making new plastic, promotes circularity. But it had limits. The quality often degrades each time you recycle it.
Right, it gets weaker.
Yeah. And some struggles with mixed plastics or stuff that's really dirty. You need good sorting systems for it to work well.
Then there's chemical recycling. Sounds more complex.
It is. It uses chemical processes to break the plastic right back down to its basic building blocks, the monomers.
Like taking it apart chemically.
Exactly. The big advantage is it can handle mixed or contaminated plastics that mechanical recycling can't touch. And you can potentially get virgin quality plastic back out.
So like new plastic again.
Potentially, yeah. But the downsides.
Yeah.
It often needs a lot more energy. Its economics can be tricky, depends on oil prices, basically.
Yeah.
And you need significant investment in infrastructure and supportive policies to make it viable at scale.
Okay. And the third one was co-processing in cement plants.
Right. Using non-recyclable plastic waste as fuel, and sometimes even raw material, in cement kilns.
Burning plastic for energy to make cement.
Essentially, yeah. But in a very controlled way. The kilns get incredibly hot, so you get complete combustion. Any ash gets incorporated into the cement itself, so there's no secondary waste stream.
Oh.
So it diverts waste from landfills or oceans, reduces the need for coal or other fossil fuels in cement making, cuts greenhouse gases from that industry. But, and this is crucial, you need really strict emission controls and careful checks on what kind of plastic goes in the waiver. Definitely no PVC, for example.
So 3 different approaches, each with pros and cons.
And a critical point tying them all together, really, is economics. For any of this better collection, mechanical recycling, chemical recycling, co-processing to happen at the scale needed, it has to make economic sense.
Someone has to see value in doing it.
Exactly. Which means we need smart policies that maybe put a price on pollution or create incentives for using recycled content, factoring in those environmental costs we currently ignore.
Which leads to another question from the discussion. Could we actually have a plastic-free world, just recycling, no new production? And what would that do to society, to the economy?
Yeah, big questions. The response was nuanced. Basically, a huge amount of recycling is technically possible if the economics and policies align.
If it's attractive to do.
Right. And while society probably still needs plastic for some essential things, our overall consumption patterns need to shift. We need to get to a level that's just adequate, not excessive. Making recycling pay is a big part of nudging us that way.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. From the plastic crisis to the other huge challenge the source is focused on, overfishing.
Another long-standing, deeply damaging issue.
Yeah, the numbers are stark here too. Over 30% of the world's fish stocks overexploited, and something like 90% of the big fish tuna, marlin, sharks, already gone, depleted.
90% of the large predators. It's reshaped entire marine ecosystems and the impact on livelihoods. Millions of people depend directly on fisheries. This hits them hard.
So what's driving it? The causes seem complex.
They are, and they often overlap. Climate change is a big one. Ocean warming.
How does that affect fishing?
Well, rising temperatures make fish move. They might shift towards the poles or deeper down looking for cooler water. This messes up traditional fishing grounds, breeding areas, feeding patterns. Plus, things like coral bleaching and seagrass loss, also linked to warming and pollution, destroy vital nursery habitats where young fish grow. So reproduction itself is impacted.
Makes sense. And then there's just plain old overfishing.
Plain old overfishing, yeah. Driven by too much fishing effort, too many boats, using gear that's too effective, catching fish faster than they can possibly reproduce and replenish their numbers.
The tragedy of the commons idea.
Exactly. Everyone trying to catch as much as they can before someone else does, leading to the collapse of the shared resource.
And IU fishing, that illegal stuff.
Illegal, unreported, and unregulated. It's a massive factor, hugely destabilizing. It's particularly bad for developing countries. They often have huge coastlines, huge exclusive economic zones, but lack the resources, the boats, the planes, the tech, to actually monitor and control what's happening in their waters.
So foreign fleets can just come in and take fish illegally.
It happens all the time. Huge economic losses for those countries, and the fish often bypass local markets completely, undermining local food security.
There was a really interesting point about the biology of fish stocks, about the big fish.
Yes, this is critical. Overfishing tends to take out the biggest fish first. And those big, mature females, they are reproductively goal D.
Why is that?
They produce way, way more eggs than smaller, younger females. And the eggs they produce are often larger, healthier, with better survival rates for the larvae.
Ah, okay. Quality and quantity.
Exactly. So when you fish out all the big ones and the population is dominated by small, young fish, you get fewer eggs, smaller eggs, higher mortality for the next generation. It's a classic sign a fish population is heading towards collapse. Understanding that biology is absolutely key for managing fisheries locally.
One expert suggested we need to think about fish differently, like wildlife.
Yeah, I thought that was a powerful point, especially for capture fisheries where we're harvesting wild populations. Treat them as wildlife first, which means governments have a responsibility to figure out how much you can sustainably take while leaving enough breeders, especially those big females, to keep the population healthy.
Manage it like we manage deer or ducks or something.
Kind of, yeah. Assess the stock, set limits based on science.
But the regional bodies that are supposed to do this, they struggle.
Often, yes.
Yeah.
The sources mention things like the Lake Victoria Fisheries Organization. These bodies exist, they have the mandate to manage shared stocks across borders, but they can get bogged down by politics, lack of funding, lack of enforcement power, internal squabbles. It makes it hard for them to actually implement the tough conservation measures that are needed.
So given all these pressures, how do we actually build a more sustainable future for fisheries? What's the path forward?
A key bottleneck identified in the sources is actually human capacity, people. Meaning, many of the public officials responsible for managing fisheries lack the specialized professional training they really need. They might come from various backgrounds, general biology, economics, administration, which makes it hard to operate as one cohesive, expert team focused on sustainable fisheries management.
They don't have the specific toolkit.
Exactly. So the proposed solution, flagged as urgent, is the need for specialized training programs. Think short, focused master's degrees in fishery science.
Who create?
To create professional fisheries managers. People equipped with the skills to monitor stocks properly, design and enforce quotas, develop policies to combat IU fishing, understand the ecosystem links, and importantly, work with local fishing communities, empower them.
What kind of skills are needed?
Things like governance, leadership, ecosystem science, resource assessment, policy analysis, community engagement, a whole suite of things.
And is this just an idea, or is it happening?
It's actually moving forward. There's a concrete initiative. The idea of a World Fisheries University.
A whole university?
Yeah, it's a joint project between the University of Nairobi in Kenya and Pukyong National University in South Korea. It's got backing from the Kenyan government, the African Union, and even got approval from the FAO's Committee on Fisheries COFAI. They've already pilot-tested programs.
Oh, it's a real thing, aiming for global impact.
That's the goal, yeah.
Yeah.
Building that professional capacity worldwide.
And the training isn't just the hard science.
No, it includes leadership, governance, community work,
Yeah.
and crucially, ocean literacy.
Yeah.
Just increasing global understanding of the oceans, which is vital, especially now during the UN's Decade of Ocean Science. These trained professionals would be key communicators.
That makes sense. Train the experts, and they help educate everyone else.
Exactly.
But training people is one thing. Another question that came up was, how do you make sure these trained professionals actually get the jobs, get into positions where they can use their skills?
Yeah, that's a really practical, important point. The sources highlighted the need for these professionals and the training initiative itself, but they didn't explicitly detail the pathway to guaranteed jobs. That seems like a critical implementation challenge that needs addressing. How do you connect the training pipeline to the actual positions of influence?
Right. And another practical challenge mentioned was stock assessments, figuring out how many fish are actually there.
Super important for setting sustainable quotas. But the question raised was, how often do you need to do them? And how do you organize it consistently? Because they're expensive. They take time, boats, expertise.
Another big hurdle.
Definitely. A key question that underscores the ongoing financial and logistical challenges in just doing the basic science needed for good management.
Okay, let's circle back to something that kind of underpins both the plastic problem and the overfishing problem. The sources talked about a missing piece, the economic dimension.
Yeah, this was a really fundamental point. Our current way of doing things, using plastic, catching fish, often operates as if the planet and the ocean are infinite. Resources are treated as free.
There's no cost assigned to using the ocean as a dump or taking fish out.
Pretty much. Or the cost isn't properly factored in. Fish get caught, water gets polluted, because there's often no direct economic penalty for degrading that natural resource within our current systems.
And the experts argued that has to change.
Fundamentally. One really provocative idea was that maybe we need to start economically valuing the ocean itself, its health, the services it provides.
Putting a price tag on a healthy ocean.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
Or creating some kind of economic or even monetary framework based on ocean health. The argument was, without assigning real tangible value, the incentive to just keep taking and polluting that extraordinary onslaught is just too strong under our current economic logic.
That's a radical idea, valuing the ocean as the basis for a new currency.
It's out there, yeah. But it highlights the need for a deep shift in how we account for natural capital.
And we should remember, plastics and overfishing are huge, but they're not the only threats, right?
Absolutely not. The sources briefly touched on others, pesticides running off farmland, various synthetic chemicals. These are complex problems in their own right. It's all part of the broader challenge of managing our total human footprint on the planet.
It all comes down to managing ourselves better.
Ultimately, yes. The call was for a fundamental change in direction, moving towards what they called an Earth-based direction in how we make decisions, getting away from choices driven purely by, unchecked consumption and ego.
Because the current path.
The current path, the sources warned, is leading towards the failure of Earth's basic life support systems. It's a stark reminder. Air, water, soil, food, the plants, the animals, they make us possible, not the other way around.
Right, we depend on them entirely.
Entirely.
Okay, so wrapping this deep dive up, we've seen the sheer scale of these challenges. Plastic is literally everywhere, surface to seabed, fish stocks under immense pressure, many collapsing.
And these issues are deeply tangled together. Climate change affects fish and potentially how plastics move. Fishing gear becomes plastic pollution. It's all connected.
And while past efforts might have only skimmed the surface, as the experts said, there are promising ideas and actions emerging.
Definitely. That youth-led cleanup work is inspiring. New recycling technologies offer potential, and that push for professional training in fisheries management is critical for building long-term capacity.
So there's hope, but it requires massive effort and change.
A huge amount of effort, yeah. Policy changes, economic shifts, technological innovation, individual responsibility, all of it.
And that core principle you mentioned earlier, from the sources, it feels like the main takeaway.
That the planet Earth doesn't belong to us. We belong to planet Earth.
Yeah, that really reframes everything.
It does.
We hope this deep dive has given you, our listener, a clearer picture of just how big these problems are, but also some of the solutions being discussed by experts and the fundamental shifts needed in policy, in economics, and expertise to really tackle them.
And maybe, as we finish, here's a final thought to leave you with, something that really resonated from the source material. Saving the oceans. It isn't really just about saving fish or cleaning up beaches somewhere far away.
It's about us.
Ultimately, yeah. It's about saving ourselves, saving the Earth systems that support us.
Yeah.
And it's about upholding our responsibility to the future. That idea that a healthy planet, healthy oceans, they're really on loan to us from future generations.
And we have a duty to leave them in the best shape possible. Clean, healthy oceans.
That's the goal. That has to be the goal.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.